2 weeks passed. Frank settled into a routine that kept him alive and sane. He woke each morning at 0600 hours, military time ingrained in his body after years of service. First came a quick breakfast of an MRE, followed by checking all security feeds. He documented any new alien behaviors in his growing log, exercised for exactly 1 hour in the limited space, then cleaned his weapons. The rest of his day followed the same pattern: observe, record, eat, exercise, clean weapons, sleep, repeat. His military training had prepared him for isolation, but nothing could fully prepare a person for being the last human on the moon. Day 14, Frank spoke into his tablet. The Vrexians have established what looks like a research station in our main lab. They've dismantled most of our communication equipment. No sign they've detected the emergency beacon. He zoomed in on the security feed. The crystalline aliens moved with that same unsettling coordination he had noted from the beginning. They never bumped into each other, never seemed to miscommunicate. Frank envied their certainty even as he feared it. They're still working in cycles that match our Earth day, despite having no need to. Interesting, they become less active during our night hours. During these periods, they gather in the main hall and enter what I can only describe as a resting state. Their light pulses slow down to about one flash every 30 seconds. Frank put down his tablet and picked up a protein bar. He had been carefully rationing his food, though he had enough to last for months. Better to be cautious. No one knew exactly when rescue would come or if it would come at all. His eyes drifted to the photo of Diane and Lisa that he had propped up next to his makeshift bed. "Morning, ladies," he said, his voice sounding strange in the silence of the armory. Another exciting day on the moon. The neighbors are still weird, but they keep to themselves mostly. Talking to the photo had started 3 days ago. Frank knew it wasn't healthy, but it helped. The sound of a human voice, even his own, kept the silence from pressing in too hard. "Lisa, you'd find these aliens fascinating. All crystal and light? Like those fairy decorations you put on your bedroom ceiling?" He smiled at the memory. "Diane, you'd already have figured out how to talk to them. Always were better with communication than me." He turned back to the security feeds. Something was different today. A group of 6 Vrexians had gathered near the base's emergency siren system. They appeared to be examining the control panel. Frank leaned forward, watching closely. The aliens had mostly avoided the emergency systems until now. What had changed? One of the aliens extended a crystalline limb and touched the panel. Immediately, the emergency siren in that section blared to life. Frank flinched at the sudden noise coming through the security feed's audio. But his reaction was nothing compared to the aliens. The Vrexians convulsed violently. Their crystalline bodies vibrated at a frequency that made them blur on the screen. 2 of them collapsed entirely, their bodies cracking in places. The others quickly pulled back, their light pulses flashing in rapid, chaotic patterns that Frank had never seen before. Well, Frank whispered, quickly making notes. "Don't like loud noises, do you?" This was valuable information. He checked the base schematics on his tablet. The emergency siren system was divided into sections. He could activate each section individually from his security console. Time for a little experiment. Frank selected a section of the base far from his armory and activated the siren. On the security feed, he watched as any Vrexians in that area reacted with the same violent convulsions. Their light communication became erratic, almost like screaming. He tried different sections, different siren patterns. Each time, the result was the same. The Vrexians couldn't tolerate the high-frequency sound of the human emergency system. Frank smiled for the first time in 2 weeks. He had found a weakness. His celebration was cut short when the security system alerted him to movement in the corridor outside the armory. A group of 3 Vrexians moved slowly down the hall, their light pulses dim and cautious. Frank froze. Had they detected him somehow? He checked the seal on the door, the ventilation system. Everything was secure. They shouldn't be able to know he was here. The aliens stopped directly outside the armory door. They extended their limbs, touching the metal surface gently. Their bodies flashed with rapid pulses of light. Frank reached for his rifle, checking that it was loaded. If they tried to come through that door, they would learn exactly how many bullets a trained Marine could put into a target in under 3 seconds. Minutes passed. Frank barely breathed. Finally, the aliens moved on, continuing down the corridor. He exhaled slowly, lowering his rifle. That had been too close. He needed to be more careful. That night, Frank dreamed of home. He was in his backyard, grilling steaks while Lisa played on the swing set he had built. Diane was setting the table on the patio, laughing at something he had said. The dream shifted. The backyard was gone, replaced by the sterile corridors of the lunar base. Lisa and Diane were still there, but they were running, screaming. Behind them, the crystalline forms of the Vrexians flashed with angry light. Frank woke with a gasp, his hand already on his pistol. The armory was quiet. The security feed showed nothing unusual. Just another night on the moon. He wiped cold sweat from his forehead and checked the time. 300 hours. Too early to start the day. Too late to hope for restful sleep. Sorry about that, he said to the photo of his family. Bad dream, the photo didn't answer, of course. The silence stretched out, broken only by the soft hum of the air recycling system. Frank picked up his tablet and added to his log. Day 15. Discovered Vrexians are extremely sensitive to high-frequency sounds, particularly our emergency sirens. This could be a tactical advantage if needed. Had first close encounter with aliens near the armory. They appeared to be examining the door but moved on without attempting entry. We'll continue to monitor their movements and maintain radio silence. He paused, then added, sleep becoming difficult. Having dreams about home, about Diane and Lisa, need to stay focused. Earth will send help, just need to hold out until then. Frank put down the tablet and picked up his rifle. He began disassembling it, cleaning each part with practiced precision. The familiar routine calmed his mind. His ammunition would last. For months, his food and water would sustain him. But as the silence of the lunar night pressed in around him, Frank wondered if his patience would hold out as long as his bullets. 3 months. Frank had been alone in the armory for 3 months. His beard had grown long and wild. His eyes had dark circles beneath them. His uniform hung loose on his frame despite careful rationing of food. Day 92, Frank spoke to his tablet. His voice was rough from disuse. Still, no sign of rescue. Vrexians continue to explore the base. They've started to... He paused, rubbing his eyes. They've started to take apart the larger equipment. Maybe building something new. Frank put the tablet down and looked at the security feeds. The images blurred occasionally. He blinked hard to clear his vision. Sleep had become his enemy. Every time he closed his eyes, the nightmares came. Diane and Lisa running from crystal monsters. His fellow Marines calling for help as they died. Sometimes he dreamed he was back home, only to wake up in the cold armory. You need to keep it together, he told himself firmly. Frank picked up the photo of his family. The edges were worn from constant handling. Hey, ladies, he said. Sorry. I missed Lisa's birthday. 8 years old now, getting so big. He smiled at the photo. I'll make it up to her when I get home. Maybe that puppy she's been asking for. A sound from the ventilation system made Frank jump. He grabbed his rifle and pointed it at the vent. Nothing happened. Just the normal sounds of the air recycling, but was it? Frank moved closer to the vent, listening carefully. Was that whispering? He pressed his ear against the metal grate. Dot, dot. Find you soon, dot. The voice was faint, barely audible. Frank jerked back, his heart pounding. That wasn't real. Couldn't be real. No one else was alive on the base. It was his mind playing tricks. He took several deep breaths, trying to calm himself. This wasn't good. He was starting to hear things. The isolation was getting to him faster than he had expected. Frank forced himself to look at the security feeds again. The Vrexians moved through the base with their usual coordination. In the main lab, they were indeed building something. It looked like some kind of tower made from parts of the base's larger equipment. What are you up to? Frank muttered. He zoomed in as much as the camera allowed. The structure appeared to have some kind of dish at the top. A communication device? Were they calling for reinforcements? The thought sent a chill down Frank's spine. If more Vrexians arrived before Earth sent help, there would be no hope for him or possibly for Earth itself. Frank checked his weapons. Again, a habit that had become almost hourly. Rifles, pistols, grenades, all clean, all loaded, all ready. He had enough ammunition to hold off an army, but his mind was another matter. A warning light flashed on the security console. Movement in the corridor outside the armory. Frank switched to that camera feed. 3 Vrexians stood outside his door again, their crystalline bodies pulsing with light. This time, they had brought tools. No, Frank whispered. No, no, no. The aliens began to work on the control panel beside the door. They were trying to override the lock. Frank grabbed his rifle and took up position behind an overturned table he had set up as a defensive barrier. His hands were steady as he aimed at the door. Years of training took over, pushing aside the fear and fatigue. The door remained shut, but the control panel sparked as the aliens interfered with it. They were making progress. Frank had a decision to make. If he waited until they breached the door, he would have the advantage of a defensive position. But if they succeeded in opening the door, they would know someone was inside before they entered. He decided to act first. Frank reached for the security console without taking his eyes off the door. He found the controls for the emergency sirens and activated the section directly outside the armory. The effect was immediate. The high-pitched wail of the siren sent the Vrexians into violent convulsions. Their bodies vibrated and cracked. Their light pulses became erratic, flashing in patterns that seemed like pain. But they didn't retreat. Despite their obvious distress, the aliens continued working on the control panel. Their determination surprised Frank. They were willing to endure pain to complete their mission. The control panel sparked again, more violently this time. The door's lock disengaged with a loud click. Frank took aim. The moment that door opened, he would fire. The door slid open halfway and stopped. The aliens had damaged the mechanism. 2 Vrexians collapsed, their crystalline bodies shattered by the continued exposure to the siren. The third pushed through the opening, its body cracking but still functional. Frank fired. The first shots hit the alien center mass. The bullets cracked its crystalline structure but didn't stop it. Frank adjusted his aim, firing repeatedly at the same spot. The focused fire created a weakness. The alien's body finally shattered after the 6th shot, falling to pieces on the armory floor. Frank moved quickly to the door, firing through the opening at the fallen aliens outside to make sure they weren't a threat. Then he forced the door closed manually and engaged the emergency mechanical lock, a simple bolt that couldn't be hacked. His heart raced as he surveyed the scene. 3 dead aliens. The first he had killed since the initial attack. The pieces of their bodies glittered on the floor like broken glass. Frank turned off the siren and the sudden silence felt heavy. They know I'm here now, he said to himself. They'll be back. With more, he looked at the remains of the alien on his floor. Its crystalline body continued to pulse weakly with light, though it was clearly dead. Frank knelt beside it, fascinated despite his fear. Up close, he could see complex structures within the crystal, like frozen lightning. What are you? He whispered. The light faded completely, leaving only clear crystal behind. Frank returned to the security feeds. As he expected, there was increased activity among the Vrexians. They gathered in the main hall, their light pulses rapid and intense. They were communicating, planning how to deal with him. He checked the water recycling system and noticed a problem. During the brief firefight, a stray bullet had damaged one of the pipes. Water leaked slowly onto the floor. Frank tried to repair it with tools from the maintenance kit, but the damage was too severe. The system would continue to work, but at reduced efficiency. His water supply, once seemingly endless, now had a time limit. Frank sat heavily on his makeshift bed, suddenly exhausted. He had survived the immediate threat, but his situation had worsened significantly. The aliens knew he was here. His water supply was compromised. And his mind. He looked at the vent again, listening for whispers that he knew weren't real. His ammo would hold out. But his patience, his sanity, was wearing dangerously thin. Frank stared at the security feeds, his eyes red from lack of sleep. A week had passed since the Vrexians had discovered his hiding place. He had expected an immediate assault, but it never came. Instead, the aliens had returned to their work. On the strange tower in the main lab, it was nearly complete now. Day 99, Frank recorded in his tablet. Water recycling system at 40% capacity. Estimated 2 months of water remaining. He paused, rubbing his eyes. The Vrexians are acting like the attack never happened. Why? What are they waiting for? Frank hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch since the attack. Every sound made him jump. The whispers in the ventilation system had grown louder, more insistent. He knew they weren't real, but that didn't make them any less frightening. He looked at the photo of Diane and Lisa. I need to do something, he told them. I can't just sit here and wait for them to come back, or for the water to run out, or for my mind to break completely. The tower the Vrexians were building worried him more with each passing day. If it was a communication device, they might be calling for reinforcements. If Earth sent a rescue team into a larger alien force, it would be a disaster. Frank needed to know what the tower was for. And for that, he needed to leave the safety of the armory. The thought terrified him. The armory had been his fortress. His sanctuary, outside was danger. Outside were the creatures that had killed his friends and comrades. But staying meant certain death, one way or another. Frank began to plan. He studied the ventilation system schematics on his tablet. The vents were small, but a human could crawl through them. They connected every part of the base, including the main lab where the tower stood. He packed a small bag with essentials: water, food, medical supplies, extra ammunition. He strapped a pistol to his thigh and slung a rifle across his back. He considered taking grenades, but decided against it. Too risky in the confined space of the vents. Frank recorded a final message on his tablet. Day 99. I'm leaving the armory to investigate the alien structure in the main lab. If I don't return and someone finds this, tell Diane and Lisa Carter that I love them. Tell Earth what happened here. He looked at the photo of his family one last time, then tucked it securely in his breast pocket, close to his heart. The vent cover came off easily. Frank took a deep breath and crawled inside. The metal tunnel was tight but passable. He moved slowly, careful not to make noise. Every few meters he consulted the schematics on his tablet to ensure he was going the right way. The journey was longer than he expected. The base had seemed smaller on the security feeds. After an hour of crawling, his knees and elbows were raw despite the protection of his uniform. Frank passed vent openings that looked down into various rooms of the base. Through one, he saw Vrexians dismantling computer equipment. Through another, they appeared to be studying human remains. Frank looked away quickly from that one, bile rising in his throat. Finally, he reached the vent above the main lab. He peered through the grate. The tower dominated the center of the room. It rose nearly to the ceiling, a strange combination of base equipment and crystalline alien technology. At its top was a dish-like structure pointed upward toward Earth. 6 Vrexians worked around the base of the tower, their bodies pulsing with rapid light patterns. They seemed excited, almost frantic in their movements. Frank watched for over an hour, trying to understand what he was seeing. The tower didn't look like a weapon. It looked like a communication device, but different from the ones he had seen on their ship. One of the Vrexians approached the tower with what appeared to be a recording device. It attached the device to the base of the tower. Immediately, a human voice filled the room. Donner base to Earth control. We have detected an unknown object on the dark side of the moon. Sending armed team to investigate. We'll report back. Frank recognized the voice. It was Commander Allen, his superior officer. This was a recording from before the attack, when they had first detected the alien presence. The recording continued. describing the deployment of armed Marines to investigate the unknown object, the Vrexian scout ship. Frank suddenly understood. The aliens had attacked because they thought they were being attacked. They had intercepted human communications and detected armed humans approaching their location. The Vrexians hadn't come to invade. They had come to observe. And then they had defended themselves when they thought humans were attacking them. The realization hit Frank like a physical blow. This whole conflict, all the death, might have been based on a misunderstanding. But if that was true, why were the Vrexians building this communication tower now? What were they trying to say, and to whom? Frank's thoughts were interrupted by a sound behind him in the vent. He turned, struggling in the narrow space, and saw a crystalline form approaching through the tunnel. He had been followed. Frank tried to bring his rifle to bear, but there wasn't enough room. He reached for his pistol instead, but before he could draw it, the alien was upon him. In the confined space, they struggled awkwardly. The Vrexians' crystal body scratched Frank's skin, drawing blood. Its light pulses flashed rapidly, perhaps calling for help. Frank managed to draw his knife. He stabbed at the alien, aiming for the spots where he had seen their bodies crack during the previous encounter. The knife found its mark, and the alien's body began to fracture. With a final effort, Frank drove the knife deep into the creature. Its light pulses stuttered, then went dark. But the damage was done. The struggle had been noisy. Frank could hear movement below in the lab. The other Vrexians had heard. He had to move now. Frank pushed the dead alien aside and crawled as fast as he could back the way he had come. Behind him, he could hear sounds of pursuit. The Vrexians were in the ventilation system, following him. His breath came in ragged gasps as he pushed himself to move faster. The schematics blurred on his tablet screen. Was this the right turn? He couldn't remember. Frank took a left at a junction, then a right. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter. Had he lost them? Or had he lost himself? After what seemed like hours, Frank found himself at a vent opening he didn't recognize. He checked the schematics. This wasn't the way back to the armory. He had taken a wrong turn. He peered through the grate. The room below was the base's communication center. The equipment was mostly dismantled, but some of it might still work. Frank made a split-second decision. He kicked out the vent cover and dropped into the room below. His legs buckled when he hit the floor, weak from months of limited exercise. He stumbled but kept his balance. The communication center was empty of Vrexians, at least for now. Frank moved quickly to the main console. Some of it was still intact. If he could send a message to Earth, tell them what he had discovered. He worked frantically, trying to power up the remaining equipment. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of Vrexians moving through the base, searching for him. His ammunition would hold out. But his patience had finally run out. It was time to act. Frank worked frantically at the communication console. His fingers, once steady, now trembled as they moved across the controls. Behind him, the sounds of Vrexians searching the base grew closer. "Come on," he whispered, wheeling the damaged equipment. To work, a light flickered on the console. Power, not much, but enough. Frank quickly configured the emergency broadcast system. He had one chance to send a message to Earth. He pressed the record button. "This is Sergeant Frank Carter of Lunar Defense Base. I am alive. The aliens that attacked us, I call them Vrexians, are not what we thought." He spoke rapidly, knowing time was short. They didn't come to invade. They were here to observe. They attacked because they thought we were attacking them first. This is a misunderstanding, not an invasion. Frank paused, hearing crystal footsteps in the corridor outside. "The Vrexians are building a communication device. I think they're trying to talk to us. Don't send armed forces, send diplomats. Try to communicate. We can avoid more bloodshed." The door to the communication center slid open. 3 Vrexians stood in the doorway, their crystal bodies pulsing with rapid light. Frank reached for his rifle, then stopped. What was the point? More killing wouldn't solve anything. Instead, he pressed the send button on the console. A green light confirmed his message was transmitting. He turned to face the aliens, his hands empty at his sides. The Vrexians didn't advance. They stood in the doorway, their light pulses slowing from the frantic pace to something more measured. Were they confused by his lack of aggression? Frank made a decision. He took a step forward, hands still open and visible. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, knowing they couldn't understand his words but hoping they might understand his intent. The Vrexians' lights pulsed in complex patterns. One of them stepped forward, mirroring Frank's movement. It extended a crystalline limb, not in attack, but in offering. Frank hesitated, then slowly raised his hand. The alien's limb stopped, just short of touching him. Light pulsed along its body, moving from its core to the extended limb. Was this communication? Was it trying to talk to him? Frank reached out, his fingers trembling. When they touched the crystal limb, a shock ran through his body. Not painful, but intense. Images flooded his mind, a distant planet of crystal formations, ships traveling through space, the moon growing larger in a viewport, humans seen through alien eyes. The connection broke as suddenly as it had formed. Frank stumbled back, gasping. The Vrexian also retreated, its light pulses erratic. "You were trying to show me," Frank said, understanding dawning. "You were trying to explain." Before the alien could respond, an explosion rocked the base. The floor trembled beneath Frank's feet. Emergency lights flashed. Frank ran to a nearby window. In the airless landscape of the moon, he saw a ship descending. A human ship. Rescue had finally arrived. But it wasn't coming in peace. The ship fired again, targeting the Vrexian vessel on the landing pad. The alien ship shattered in a spray of crystal fragments. "No," Frank shouted, though no one could hear him. He turned back to the Vrexians. Their light pulses had become chaotic, flashing in patterns he recognized as distress. They had just lost their only way home. Frank made a split-second decision. He pointed to the Vrexians, then to himself, then to a storage room nearby. "Hide," he said, making pushing motions toward the room. "Hide." Whether they understood his words or his intent, the Vrexians moved toward the storage room. Frank helped the last one inside, then closed the door. He ran back to the communication console and tried to broadcast again. "Earth forces, this is. Sergeant Frank Carter, hold your fire. The aliens are not hostile? I repeat, the aliens are not hostile?" But the console was dead. The last transmission had drained its power. Frank cursed and ran toward the nearest airlock. He needed to get outside, to signal the rescue ship somehow. As he ran, he passed the main lab. The communication tower the Vrexians had built was still there, still intact. Frank skidded to a halt, the tower. It was more powerful than the bases. Damaged systems, if he could use it. Frank rushed to the tower. The alien technology was foreign to him, but they had built it partly from human equipment. He could see familiar components. Outside, through the lab windows, he saw armed figures. In spacesuits advancing from the landed ship. They carried heavy weapons. They were coming to kill, not to talk. Frank worked desperately, trying to interface his tablet with the alien technology. If he could just broadcast one message. The tower hummed to life under his hands. Energy pulsed through the crystalline components. Frank connected his tablet to the base and recorded a final message. "This is Sergeant Frank Carter. The Vrexians are peaceful. This was all a misunderstanding. They attacked because they thought we were attacking them. They've been trying to communicate. Please, no more violence. First contact shouldn't be like this." He added all his observation logs, all his notes about the Vrexians. Everything he had learned in his months of isolation. Frank sent the message, broadcasting it on all frequencies. The tower pulsed with energy as it transmitted. The lab door opened. Frank turned, expecting to see Vrexians or human soldiers. Instead, he saw a woman in a different type of spacesuit. "Not military, scientific. Sergeant Carter?" she said, her voice crackling through her suit's speaker. "I'm Dr. Lavro Wells from the Diplomatic Corps. We received your first transmission. Where are the aliens you mentioned?" Frank nearly collapsed with relief. Someone had listened. His message had gotten through. "They're hiding," he said, his voice rough. "They're scared. They think we're Going to kill them all, Dr. Wells nodded. We're here to talk, not to fight. The military team has been ordered to stand down. She looked at the tower. Did they build this to communicate with us? Yes, Frank said. They've been trying to talk to us all along. We just couldn't understand. 3 months later, Frank stood at the window of a different room in the lunar base. The base had been rebuilt, expanded. New sections had been added, designed to accommodate both humans and Vrexians. The photo of Diane and Lisa was still in his pocket, but it had company now, a small crystal that pulsed gently with light. A gift from the Vrexian he had first touched, who now had a name, First Light of Understanding. Earth ships arrived regularly now, bringing scientists, diplomats, and supplies. Vrexian ships had also come, once they realized their scout team was communicating peacefully with humans. Frank watched as humans and Vrexians worked together in the crater below, building what would become the first joint colony. His ammo had held out until the end. He had never needed to use most of it. It was his patience that had failed his. Patience for hiding, for waiting, for fighting a war that never needed to happen. And in the end, that impatience had saved them all. The stars looked different from the observation deck of the Celestial Harmony, the massive peacekeeping vessel that served as the mobile headquarters for the Galactic Cooperative. Lieutenant John Reeves pressed his hand against the transparent aluminum viewport and took a deep breath. After 20 years in the Navy SEALs and another 5 as a military liaison, he never imagined he'd be representing humanity among the stars. Earth had only joined the Cooperative 2 years ago in 2155, becoming the 18th species in the Interstellar Alliance. Humans were still novelties to most aliens, curiosities from a developing world as they politely called Earth. Lieutenant Reeves, your presence is requested in Briefing Chamber 3, announced the ship's AI in its pleasant gender-neutral voice. John straightened his dark blue uniform with gold trim, the new standard for Earth's diplomatic corps, and made his way through the curving corridors. Even after 3 weeks aboard, he still marveled at how the ship accommodated beings of such different shapes and sizes. Doors expanded or contracted depending on who approached, and the atmosphere subtly shifted to match each species. Preferred breathing mix? The briefing chamber contained a circular table surrounded by representatives from 7 different worlds. John recognized Ambassador Zilther, the insectoid Vespian who commanded this mission. The ambassador's compound eyes gleamed under the soft light as John entered. Ah, our human colleague arrives, Zilther said, mandibles clicking softly. Please, be seated, Lieutenant. John nodded and took the empty seat. He noticed several delegates shift slightly away from him, a reaction he'd grown used to. Most, aliens maintained a polite but noticeable distance from humans. As you all know, Zilther continued, we approach Proxima 5, where the Tezra and Nilarian peoples have reached a dangerous point in their territorial dispute. The Cooperative Council has authorized us to negotiate a peaceful resolution. The holographic display in the center of the table activated, showing a blue-green world with 2 distinct population centers glowing on opposite hemispheres. The Tezra control the northern continent, explained Krell, the massive Mantidean security chief. His exoskeleton was a deep forest green, and his forearms remained perfectly still as he spoke. The Nilarians inhabit the southern oceans and coastlines. Between them lies the verdant belt rich in minerals both species desire. John listened carefully, taking notes on his datapad. This was standard peacekeeping procedure, not unlike Earth missions he'd observed in Sudan and Myanmar. Territorial disputes followed universal patterns, regardless of how many limbs or eyes the participants had. Our team will divide into 2 negotiating groups, Zilther said. I will lead the discussions with the Tezra High Crystal. Delegate Morrow will handle the Nilarian Council. The ambassador's compound eyes swiveled toward John. Lieutenant Reeves will accompany my team as Earth's representative. John nodded, but before he could speak, Zilther added, however, I must remind everyone of Protocol 72B, which applies specifically to our human colleague. The room grew noticeably quiet. John frowned. He'd never heard of this protocol. With respect, Ambassador, he said carefully, I'm not familiar with that regulation. Zilthar's antennae twitched, a sign of discomfort John had learned to recognize. Protocol 7.2b states that human representatives are forbidden from engaging in any combat activities during cooperative missions, even in defensive capacities. John blinked in surprise. Sir, my combat experience was listed as a primary qualification for this assignment. Yes, for your tactical thinking and crisis assessment skills, Zilthar clarified. Not for implementation of physical force. This is non-negotiable, Lieutenant. Several delegates avoided eye contact. Only Kira, the young Arcturian scientist, looked at him with something resembling sympathy in her large silver eyes. After the briefing concluded, John remained seated, reviewing the mission parameters on his datapad. The protocol restriction bothered him more than it should. Earth's admission to the cooperative had come with many regulations, but singling out humans this way seemed odd. They mean no offense, said a melodic voice behind him. John turned to find Kira standing in the doorway. Arcturians resembled humans. In basic shape, though their skin had a faint blue tinge and their eyes were twice the size with no visible pupils. Feels like offense, John replied with a slight smile. Kira entered and took a seat beside him. May I speak freely, Lieutenant? Please call me John, and yes. The others avoid you because they're afraid, she said bluntly. John raised an eyebrow. Afraid? Of humans? Most species here are stronger, faster, or have natural weapons we don't. Kira's expression was hard to read, but her voice softened. It's not about physical capabilities alone. I've studied your species extensively. I find humans fascinating. We're just people, Kira. Nothing special about us. She made a sound like gentle wind chimes, an Arcturian laugh. That's where you're wrong. I've accessed archives most delegates haven't seen. Historical records from humanity's first contact. John leaned forward. The official history says first contact was peaceful. A Vespian scout ship met our International Space Station. That was the second contact, Kira corrected. The first was classified. Before she could continue, the ship's AI announced they were entering the Proxima system. All personnel were to prepare for arrival procedures. Kira stood. We should talk more later. She hesitated. Be patient with them, John. They've all heard stories, but they haven't seen what I've seen in the archives. She left him with more questions than answers. The next 3 days passed in a flurry of preparation. John studied both species' customs and taboos, determined to be an effective diplomat despite the strange restrictions placed on him on the morning of their descent. To Proxima 5's surface, John found himself alone in the shuttle bay with Krell, the Mantidean security chief. The massive alien was checking equipment with his lower arms while his upper limbs adjusted his ceremonial armor. Lieutenant, Krell acknowledged with a slight bow of his armored head. I wish to clarify something about Protocol 7.2b. I'm listening. John said, It exists for the protection of all parties, Krell stated. His voice was deep and resonated from somewhere inside his thorax, including you. How does preventing me from defending myself or others protect anyone? John asked. Krell's mandibles clicked 3 times, the Mantidean equivalent of a sigh. The protocol exists because humans are the only species in the cooperative that evolved as pursuit predators. John frowned. Mantideans are predators. So, are Vespians? We evolved from ambush hunters, Krell corrected. We wait, we strike quickly. Most predator species in the galaxy evolved this way. But humans... He paused, all 4 hands making a complex gesture. Humans chase, humans plan. Humans corner their prey and execute violence with ... creativity. Before John could respond, the rest of the diplomatic team arrived. Ambassador Zilthar led them, his iridescent ceremonial robes catching the light. Today we bring peace to Proxima 5, the ambassador announced. Remember your training and the honor of the cooperative you represent. As they boarded the shuttle, John caught Kira watching him. She gave him a subtle nod that somehow felt like both a warning and encouragement. The shuttle doors sealed, and John felt the familiar flutter in his stomach as they launched toward the planet's surface. Whatever mysteries surrounded Protocol 72B and humanity's place in the stars would have to wait. For now, they had a piece to broker. What John didn't know was how quickly those mysteries would unravel, and how violently the truth would reveal itself on the world below.